We are wrapping up Women's History Month with an amazing conversation with my mentor and friend, Sabrina Coleman Clark. Sabrina is a well-traveled professional soprano and opera singer. She's won numerous awards, and she's also a senior executive at the Department of Veterans Affairs, currently working as the director of the Center for Development and Civic Engagement. There's so much we discuss: legacy, sisterhood, end of life conversations are happening here. There's something to gain for everyone. Sabrina Coleman Clark, welcome to the Best Life of Wellbeing podcast. I am so grateful to have you here today.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to have been invited.
So this podcast is dedicated to normalizing death, grief, end of life, legacy, and whole life conversations that educate and inspire us to embrace our whole life by focusing on our end of life. So I wanted to have you here because, one, I admire you so much. This is Women's History Month. You, in my opinion, you understand what sisterhood is about. You're also a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. You are a leader. You are a highly sought after soprano and opera singer. You've won numerous awards. And the theme for Women's History Month, the theme is to celebrate women who advocate for equality, diversity, and inclusion. And, you know, that's right up your alley.
Yes, it is.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about some of that today. I do have some questions to help edify me. You are also my mentor and have been for a very long time. And so you are always pouring into my life. And I want to say before we even begin, thank you so much for being who you are. Not just what you do, but the example you set with your life.
Thank you so much for that, Donna. But I have to say is that being a mentor to you, first of all, is an honor. I'm glad that when you could have asked anybody literally in the world that you chose me, but I've learned so much from you in the process. And I think that that's what good mentors do, that you're also always learning. So I appreciate the opportunity to have learned so much from you, and watching your process in a number of areas has been inspiring to me as well. So the feeling is mutual.
Thank you so much. So you're also a senior executive with the Department of Veterans Affairs and currently the director of the VA Center for Development and Civic Engagement, and a doctor in positive psychology. You are a very well-rounded person, and you are constantly growing in your career and in life. And I
Thank you so much. And I'll qualify a couple of things in my bios, that while I have completed my training and certified as a senior executive in federal government, I do not yet hold a position as a senior executive in government. And the full title of my PhD program, which I'm proud of myself for that at this point in my life, is positive neuropsychology. So really not just that, the psychology part of it, but the brain science behind that. So I just wanted to qualify a little of that. Thank you.
Is because I do want to talk a bit about end of life planning. Sure, with your husband being a director of an assisted living facility, you, and the fact that you lost your father in 2021 and your sister in 2022, if I have those years
You
correct. Do
do?
I?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
And so your father, Theodore Roosevelt Coleman, you were, I mean, he lived alone, but you were the nearest relative to him. So you provided a lot of care and support to him.
Yeah.
And based on what you learned, what advice might you give people to just be prepared?
Yeah, I think and it's a great question. And like you say, I think that you prepare for end of life by living life today. And the reason I think that's important, because what I learned in my father's life, there were things that when you're young and you see, particularly a parent, you saw them a certain way as a child. Like I always saw my father always doing something and getting things done, and he was also one that, you know, was what we call now sort of the helicopter parent. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, when I was being, you know, watched through binoculars while I was out playing. And I didn't learn this, by the way, until I was like 40 years old. My dad told me, it's like, you know, I used to watch you when you were playing through binoculars. Like, what? You know, who knew? And so that when I went to college, like he would just show up. I lived an hour and a half from my college campus from home, clearly not far enough, but he would just show up. But what that what I saw then, I would be like, oh, my dad's always watching me. He's always so concerned. What it looked like when he got old was anxiety and fear. You get anxious. That's what it looks like when you can't do all those things that, first of all, just look like diligence and just taking good care of your kids. But
Yeah.
it looks different when it's older. So I think that if I had recognized, and what I have to recognize in myself, and that advice is recognizing yourself, that thing that you think that you're doing that seems like you say is so normalized. Well, of course I follow my kids to school, and yeah, I keep my kids, you know, whatever that finder is, you know, that you always know where your kids are. That may seem like the right thing today. But what about when they're 20, 30, 40, and when you're still trying to do that when you're 80 and they're 50? And what about that? And so I think that is to recognize, what is it that's driving some behaviors that we have today that we can make look very normal, and we can rationalize very easily, even in our thinking. But when that ability to rationalize and the behavior that you normally would have gotten into to sort of rectify that anxiety cannot be accomplished anymore, that's a whole different thing. So I think the one thing that I would say is to really recognize our behaviors, be more attuned to ourselves, and find those opportunities where we really need to learn, because it doesn't come natural. Learn to relax, learn to be by ourselves, learn what it is to be at peace, and truly understand that at your core. So
But as you're speaking, I am thinking of the word purpose in my mind. So that's the word that comes to mind as I'm listening to you speak. And as a empty nester myself, and so are you, an empty nester. When your kids are younger, and I'll speak for myself, when my children were younger, part of my purpose was, as a parent, was to be there for my children. And then when they grew up, they didn't need me in that way anymore. And so after his children were grown up and life had changed for him, what are your thoughts about purpose in that?
yeah, for my dad, his anxiety never really left. And again,
Yeah.
started looking different, because then he had a grandson. So then he could be anxious over that. So it was different things, you know, what in the way that I was parenting. So if I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, you know, Will's going to go to a week-long basketball camp. Oh, well, have you checked it out? Or are you going to go with him? Or, because you certainly can't leave him by himself there. And who else is there? And do you know the people? And for me, that these were things that were normal in this time. I never went to a camp. That's thing that we never did things like that. And so this was very unusual. But as far as like purpose, I agree that, you know, you have to change some of your behaviors, but hopefully the behaviors that you've instilled, like especially when it comes to health and wellness. If it's always been your habit to exercise, to eat well, to get good sleep, hopefully that means something later and you continue to do that. It's hard to put those habits in place when you get older and think, well, you know, I'm going to take care of it now. But so I think even that anxiety, even our bad behaviors become habits. They become ingrained.
Yeah.
We keep doing them. So, my purpose, that I think, and I'm glad to say, even my son would even tell you this, was to always, to to see him become that best version of himself, to always be, to be the person that when he looked at me, he even saw more for his life than what he could see in himself. Why letting him have options as to things he was involved in, and to the extent that we could provide it, that I always wanted him to have some choices, because I knew that life was going to, in itself, bring enough limitations. It was going, some boundaries were going to come up that he would have to navigate. But when he was young, I wanted to keep moving them out of the way and giving him as many choices as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
if I could just say one other thing about that, even when he was born, I I wanted to be a singer. My dream and what I thought my purpose was, I wanted to sing. I had my own dreams. And I remember my husband saying to me, like when my son was born, I was like, this ruins everything, because now, I can't just run out and go do these things. I have to, stay here and raise children, and I can't just travel every place. But my husband said to me, but you still have to keep, and we, meaning he and I, still have to continue to pursue our dreams, because in
Yes.
doing that, he's learning how to pursue his. If we simply stop and do nothing but that, and we don't still try to do the things that we love to do, he won't know how to do that in his life. And I am so glad that, again, my husband, before my son's even born, is that don't stop singing. Don't stop doing the things that you do, because he needs to see you pursue those things that
Yeah.
you love. And so that was really important too.
Is your husband also a singer?
He is, yes. So we have a
Thought so.
soprano and a tenor. We compete sometimes in that way, but again, as we get older and doing less of singing than what we probably both want to do at this point. Yeah, yeah, it's okay though. It's been a good duet for 32 years almost.
Awesome, awesome. So tell me a bit about how this singing came about. How old were you when you started singing? When did opera enter? You grew up in Ohio, right?
That's right.
All right. And so, yeah, tell me about how this soprano opera singer started as a child. How did this start?
Well, definitely wasn't singing opera as a child. I think, like many people, I was singing in church, although I didn't really have what I would call a church home as a child. But that's where I started singing. And certainly that's when I started. I used to sing around home all the time. My first instrument was piano, and that's what I did. I played all the time, and I loved to play and sing. And in fact, my dad used to go out and buy sheet music for me to read and play and sing of songs he liked, and he would bring them back, and here, learn this one. And so I would do these concerts for my dad of music that he liked and that he wanted to hear me sing. And that's when I started singing. But it was in college that I really didn't know a lot about opera. I knew a lot about choral music. I knew about classical music because I sang competitions in high school and sang in high school choirs. But that operatic singing is something that I got from my voice teacher, Edward Thomas Payne. And Edward Payne he doesn't teach there anymore. He's retired from there and took on another career as an Episcopal priest after leaving teaching. But he was the only African American male teacher at the university. He himself sang at the New York City Opera, and it was also something that I never saw myself doing, like opera theater. And again, many people have even said then, it's like, wait, opera? Like Black folks don't sing opera. Well, they do, And we do, and there are many, we may not know them, but of course, everyone, many people have heard of Leontine Price. Many people before
Yes.
that knew Paul Robeson, knew Marian Anderson, Kathleen Battle. These are names of people, African Americans, who sang opera theater and were very successful in that. But it's something I didn't see for myself. But like many things, some things you don't see, but you learn. And when you start learning and someone sees potential in you and they start nurturing it and feeding it, and you start growing in that way, then I saw myself doing it and really began to love it.
And okay, so that was college. How did you end up in the DC area? And tell me a bit about what happened between college and DC.
Okay. So this is only like a 1 day program, right? So because I could be talking forever on this part, but I'm going to try to consolidate here. So, um, well, when I left college, my undergraduate degree is in music therapy. And so I left college. I did my internship. That degree requires 4 years of school plus a 6-month internship, and then you get your college degree. So I did that internship in Columbia, South Carolina. When I came back to graduate school, I was then did a master's degree in vocal performance. Well, after that, went to work in South Carolina as a music therapist. But while there, I still wanted to study. So I began studying with a teacher at the University of South Carolina, the late Gene Ferguson, who himself was sang all over Europe as an operatic held in tenor, amazing person, and was a tremendous teacher for me. But I was still singing and said, well, I want to do something else. Where do you think I could go from here? And I'm in my, early 20s then. And so he's like, well, look, I'm going to make a recommendation to you. I think that you should either go to Europe, or get yourself in and around the New York area. And so at this point, I'm studying with him for several years. I get married in the process while I'm here in South Carolina. We move to New Jersey. And I did that. And that was when I first started working with VA, because I needed to have a job. I was not cut out to be a starving artist. And so I got to VA, and because I was in the New Jersey area, because I had a teacher in New York that I loved. I had several teachers in New York City. And so, but I found one that I stayed with for many years. So I just did a lot there. I flourished there. I had a good teacher, had a lot of opportunities. I had an opportunity to do many competitions and to really be involved in a number of work in theater. But then sort of my VA career was something that was beginning to look like, well, maybe I do want to see what I can do here and still sing. And that's what
Yeah.
brought me to Baltimore. And so I got to Baltimore, and it was from Baltimore. And again, the VA career going one way. I'm still singing really on the side. I resist anyone telling me, oh, this is a hobby. It's not a hobby. I am a professional musician. And so it's not a hobby. It's just another career that I have that I don't work in as much as my VA job. But again, that's my choice. So
Yeah.
I think that I do that. And then I came to DC again for the VA job. So just transitioning through a number of different positions is how I ended up coming to DC.
And right now you're still singing in churches and synagogues, and do you do any travel as a professional singer?
I do. I have not done as much, and as you might imagine, COVID put a really
Right.
halt on some of that. So for me, and just thinking about that, because I had many musician friends who wondered, what about my career, that struggled during this time because there weren't the same opportunities were not available. So
Yeah.
I consider VA a gift to me, that I never had to make a choice between singing and working and starving. It's like, okay, I got to sing
Yes.
everybody's wedding, bar mitzvah, funeral in order to make a living. I could always choose exactly what and when I wanted to sing. I just did that. So yes, I have that choice to still sing and do with choirs, do solo work when it comes up, and I feel like I have the time to learn and practice and be able to give a good performance. If it's something that's coming up quickly and I realize that I can't, practice it the way I want or won't show up in my best self when that happens, then that's a gig I turn down. Yeah, so because I don't have to take it. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna wait till I'm at my best, and I sing with a Welsh choir, and that's fascinating. And that choir, being in that organization has literally allowed me to travel around the world. And that is where I've had opportunities to go to New Zealand and to Paris and to Wales several times, and to really do a lot of travel with them. And that's been fascinating.
So how did the leadership part begin for you in the VA, and how do those two worlds complement one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm actually going to go like way, way back to my childhood to say I grew up in a school system where I was one I mean, my high school graduating class, I was one of two African Americans. And my
Mm,
entire class, I can count the number of African Americans in my primary school career all the way from K through 12 on one hand. And so
mm,
for me, like I don't even know, I didn't know what diversity, like I was the diversity for them and they were the diversity for me. But I
yeah,
didn't recognize it as diversity. I just recognized myself being in a place where there weren't other people that looked like me. So, but I want to tell you, but that experience, it never kept me from excelling and being an outstanding student and doing the things I wanted to do. So I continued in all of my life feeling, and taking on a saying for myself is that where I show up, I belong. Because that's what I felt, that's what I believed. And so in that way, I mean, I think I was probably still a leader in middle school, in high school, and that because I was doing something nobody else was doing, not knowing anybody was following me or was watching
yeah.
how I was behaving in those situations. So when it came to VA, I started feeling like what I really wanted to do was I loved training and development and education as well. And so it was doing leadership development. It was doing leadership training. And I never at that point saw myself as leading anything. I saw myself managing programs, being a program director, but I never saw myself as a leader. And I think, and you will have your own story to tell about this, Donna, because you were part of these programs. But I never saw myself as a leader, but other people did. And other people
Yeah.
told me that. And I resisted that because I just do what I do. Where I show up, I belong. I don't know whether I'm a leader. I don't put a title on it. I just was doing what I do until someone asked me to be a leader and I got scared. It's like, now I want you to take this on. I want you to supervise. I want you to be a director. And I was afraid because I had never done that before. And I've
Yes.
been a supervisor in other areas, but then, coming to VA, to big central office and other people and leaders who do call themselves leaders and that the government calls them leaders, are then saying, here, we want you to do these things. And I'm like, oh, wait. That's not me. I teach, train, I do that. So I had to sort of step in to actually, do you believe what you've been teaching? And or if you were that good at it, then some of it should have rubbed off on you. Unfortunately, a lot of it did. So I honestly would say I probably fell into leadership. I am a reluctant leader, honestly. It's not something I wanted to do because I was just intimidated by the thought of being compared to other leaders. Not myself, I'm comparing myself to other people when
Yeah.
thinking that I wasn't as good as them, or I wasn't going to be as effective as what I thought they were. And so that really was one of those first opportunities where I'd say that's when my phrase didn't work for me for a while. That where I
Mhm.
show up, I belong. That's where it didn't fit
Yeah.
anymore. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure anymore that I belong here. So it took me a while to grow into that.
How would you recommend for someone to create themselves as a leader? And this actually is with your positive neuropsychology hat, as well as your leadership hat, and as well as your where I show up, I belong hat. How do you recommend to someone to not focus on anything else, but if your desire is to lead, how do you develop yourself to become the leader you desire to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think with all of those hats on, I would say to first really identify where your own core strengths are, because there is not any strength that cannot be utilized in leadership. Nothing, no matter
Mhm.
what your strength is, it can be utilized. So I think it's really important to not put a limitation onto what you think leadership means. It's to first figure out who you are at your core. Because if you're in an agency like ours, you may say, well, being a leader means I have to be willing to work long hours and I have to, maybe you're in a hospital, like I have to understand medical technology. I have to understand IT. Well, no, that in certain fields, yes, maybe you do, but not everything. So it's important to identify for yourself, what are your core strengths? Secondly, I would say once you know those, to find, because they're out there, find leaders who are exhibiting and utilizing those core strengths that you have, and you're watching them do something, and so you can begin to see yourself in them. Like, oh,
Mm.
my strength is, I don't know. My strength is public speaking. I like doing that. I mean, I don't know a lot about medicine. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a medical doctor. So I don't know that clinical stuff, but I do like to train or teach. I'm good in front of people. So you find somebody doing that. That might be one of your strengths. Find somebody, and if you only find one person that has one strength that's really at your core, and it takes another person that has another of your strengths, find as many people as you can to identify with your core strengths. One person is not going to have all you have because you are unique in yourself. And I would
Absolutely.
remind people that you are unique. So it takes a whole lot of people to bring to you what you can bring to other folks, to the environment that you're in. It's going to take more people, but you have those core things. It'll take other people for you to identify what those are, and watch them and ask them to be your mentors, and study them. But it goes back is to not putting the label of leadership, not putting it in so firmly into some boundaries that you're thinking, I don't have these things, therefore I am not. When
Mm.
leadership is so broad. So I think that, again, taking away the boundaries, taking even away the term leadership for a while, but just finding people who are doing working in capacities that you may call leadership, using the skills and talents that you value and that you possess in some degree, a little or a lot, it doesn't matter. Follow, listen, and learn from them.
That is excellent advice. And I will say a little game I used to play with myself is I would pick my mentors. I wouldn't tell them they're my mentor, and I would follow them. Every once in a while, I would ask a question and ask the opportunity to meet with them, to hear their opinion, to hear their thoughts. But in my mind, they were my mentor because I was watching them lead and I loved the way they interacted with
Mm,
people. My favorite leaders are people, and you were one of those. You've already said it, you're just yourself and you're comfortable with being yourself. You know your strengths, you're human, so you might compare yourself to other people, but for the most part, you know who you are, you know what your strengths are, and you operate in that genuinely. And that is so important. And
Thank you.
I will say you care so much about people. It all of my mentors have been people who knew how to have tough conversations with people, and they were willing to have those tough conversations. And that's one of the things I truly admire about you. You are who you are, and you're comfortable with who you are. You're very genuine, and you care about people.
I do, and thank you for that. But I want to tell you, I definitely have not mastered the art of having tough conversations. It's very, very challenging, but I like to think that if I show up genuinely, which still doesn't necessarily make the conversation go better, because everybody is you bring your own stuff to the table, even when you're
Yeah,
trying to be authentic and kind and still people come with their stuff, you came with your stuff,
yeah,
and it's challenging, but what I think that what I've been willing to do is at least have them is it might not go well, and sometimes I'll start I don't exactly know what I'm going to say, but I know we need to have a conversation, so I'm going to
yeah,
try to get started and then see what happens, and sometimes it doesn't go well. That's it, just happens, so you got
yeah,
to let that
yeah.
be too. Yeah.
So as an educator, reading your bio, Legacy of Hope, um, is it the Marian Anderson story?
Yes,
Will you
yeah.
tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. So, Marian Anderson was the first African American to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. And I think that as I think about how I got into even doing this program, this was uh, one of these things that my husband, what I will say, forced me to do. And he had this an opportunity. The opera company happened to overhear a conversation where the opera company in Baltimore was looking for someone to do a Marian Anderson story as a community outreach for local school children. And he was in the room or in the building, wherever he was, in proximity to hear that need coming up and said, "Oh, Sabrina will do it." I was not there. I was nowhere nearby. And he said, "She will do that." And he came home and told me, it's like, guess what? You're going. I'm like, oh my God. And I was so upset. I was like, how did you commit me to doing this? I mean, this is a big deal. He was just like, he just said, do it. He said, I'm telling you, do it. And that's one thing I've learned to listen to my husband in this way, is that when he says something is telling me, I know that you are to do this, just do it. And and it was absolutely right. So I think with Marian Anderson, and although she would have never called herself sort of a civil rights person, she was reluctant to get involved into civil rights. Again, she's the first African American, but she never talked about wanting to be in civil rights. Why aren't there African Americans? That was not her story.
Right.
And so what she did, though, she did what she did. And here I go back with using your core gifts. Her talent was singing. So although that she was refused the opportunity to sing at Constitution Hall, because she was African American, and because the other thing that her folks wanted, where I think about her agents, the people who were working with her, and I don't know what she would have said about this, but they also said at Constitution Hall there needs to be an equal number of seats for blacks and whites in every section. So you can't have the black folks sitting in the balcony and all the orchestra suites only for Caucasians. And that's what they
Mhm.
demanded. And so they're like, can't happen. And so you don't ever hear that. So Marion raised a ruckus and there was a march and there was that's not what happened. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, that's not right. I'll find her a venue. And that venue was the Lincoln Memorial. And so
Yeah.
here we were, a much bigger venue, obviously, than Constitution Hall. But And so, these things happen, but I just sit and think about, no, she didn't sort of yell and scream and stomp and like, hey, we have to do these things. She just did what she did. Just keep doing what you do. Your gifts will make room for you. That's the lesson from
Yeah.
Mary. So I thought about that, how I was in myself kind of embodying some of those things, that I didn't ever want to be the loud one in the room that was just, making sure I got my way, and that to sort of shout about equity, diversity, inclusion. Those things are very important to me, but I never feel need to scream and yell about them, but to simply find ways to use the gifts that I have to make my gifts show up in venues where they have not been heard before, or they haven't been used before, and just keep doing what I do. And then I will trust God to make room for them, and to also allow for those things that really are right and just to really to show up. That's what I believe.
And were these younger women or students, or tell me about your group of people you were educating?
Yeah, that's where it started, in schools, and from elementary school. And obviously, I would have to adapt things depending on whether I was
Yeah.
working with little kids to high school students. And so as I was doing the program, that's where it started, was in the schools, and that's what it was designed for. But as individuals, even in the schools, or maybe some others would hear about it, was getting opportunities to say, hey, I would like to do this for my social club. I want to do this for my girls group. I want to do, so that's how it became something more. And when I really did take it on the road and had an agent that was actually finding opportunities for me to do it. So from that point, I was doing it in colleges. I was doing it in other in opera theaters and in venues. I was doing it for various organizations. I did it for several years for Brookings Institute Executive Education. And so I had a wonderful opportunity to do this for in Montana, of all places, a girl state program from the American Legion Auxiliary, where there was not a girl that looked like me or Marion in that group, but yet was very much receptive, because it was like, just like, this was a woman who decided to do what
Yes.
she felt was right, and what that meant, and why we're still talking about that woman even today, and how she just simply was a quiet warrior in her own way.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I will say in the VA, you have opportunities to do in your role as the director of um, the development
CDC,
and
yeah.
civic engage. Yes, development and civic engagement. You have invited me to help young high school students to understand leadership. That was an honor just to be in a high school in Washington, D.C. with young people. Just to be surrounded by young people is an honor for me. I've also had the opportunity in my organization to bring young people on through summer programs and mentor them. And that's because of you. I mean, just thank you for the work you do, not just outside of VA. I'm happy to learn about all of what you've done outside of VA, but within VA, you have done amazing work to give back to the community, to give back to youth, and to, just show up and recognize that you belong here and you're gonna make a difference in the lives of others. Let's see. You, I think you are recently, and maybe within a few years or so, a member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority.
Correct.
What made you decide to become a part of that sisterhood? All you're doing, allows you the opportunity to meet amazing people, travel the world, involved in the school system in the Washington, D.C. area, volunteering in many, many different ways. And so what made you decide to embark upon this sisterhood experience when you clearly, some people do it because they want to be around other women, but you already have like so many opportunities to be engaged and connected with people. Can you tell me a bit, about your sisterhood as a Delta and your
Yeah.
decision to choose that?
Well, I think what's interesting about being a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is that you don't kind of you don't get to decide you're going to be a member. There is a process. And as I told you about my own growing up, there was one thing that, yeah, I was around lots of girls and women, but I wasn't around very many African American women. And while I never forgot, I never had that opportunity. My father was very engaged in civil rights activities. He was a member of a lifetime member of the NAACP, of many other civil rights organizations. Um, so I never had that chance to sort of forget who I was, even while I wasn't around people who looked like me. But it's something that I wondered is like, I would like to have that opportunity. So I went to college, I had that opportunity and I could have been and had that chance to be around many diverse groups of people, obviously. But I still wanted to be a Delta. What I saw on my college campus from Deltas were the things that they were involved in. I saw the things that they stood for. They were like, oh, these are things that my dad believes in. These are activities and civil rights and social justice and activism. I like this organization. I want to be a Delta. But in college, I did not have the opportunity to truly make an effort to apply, and hopefully I would have gotten selected, but I didn't have that opportunity because remember, I was an opera singer. And I at that
Yes.
time, my voice teacher, when I said, I think I'm gonna try to be a Delta, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna pledge, I want to see if I can do. And he told me at that time, he said, you can be my Carmen, because we were doing Carmen at the time, and I was going to be the title role. He said, you can be Carmen or you can be a Delta. He said, but you cannot do both. Now I'm
Wow.
a music major. I'm a voice student. And so he said, the time it would take, the things that you have to do, to whatever was happening at that time, like I could not be out late. I could not miss rehearsals. I had to be able to stay. So I let it go. I let it go. And I let it go for 35 years. I let it go. And I didn't really know that that opportunity and that graduate chapters, that alumni chapters actually existed. I didn't know. And again, it was because I was in VA where other Deltas were who said, there's a chapter that's in your area that's actually holding a rush. And maybe you should try it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But guess what? I got scared again. And all that sudden, wherever you show up, you belong was a thing, but you got to be able to show up first. Because then I was back in college. Like, what if they reject me? What if I don't get in? And that's a very high likelihood. But that's what made me really want to do it. I've always wanted to be a Delta. And if any of the Deltas that you know that I have known for a while, all of them have heard me say that a million times to the point of just stop saying it. Like every time they go to a Delta event. Oh, I always wanted to be a Delta. And I say that to it's like, okay, you've been saying that for years to the same people. But so I had an opportunity because I believe in their mission. I really did want that opportunity then to be around like-minded women doing the things that I truly believed in, and to have a sisterhood like I have never had before. That was
Yeah.
very intentional. So yeah, I am just thrilled and so excited to be part of Delta. And that's when I think something I also promised my father in honorarium, said that's one thing I'm going to do. I will be a good Delta. I will be a good Delta. And that's what I set out to do now.
Tell me, how has becoming a Delta made a difference in your life?
Mm-hmm. So many things. And I really will try to be concise. Uh, but I think one, it helped me solidify who I am. Again, I did not grow up being around, a community of Black women or Black people for
Yes.
that matter, besides my family. But in my neighborhood and where I went to school, that was not my network. So it was like I was always sort of redefining who I was depending on the circle I was in, because I didn't have representation, which is why representation really matters. I didn't know what that
Yeah.
looked like. I had my family, of course, but that's different. I'm talking about other folks, and I didn't really see that. So I didn't see those leaders. So I wasn't sure as a Black female just where I belonged. I knew I belonged everywhere, but nowhere at the same time, because I didn't have a clear sense of identity. Now, I'm not saying that not until 2020, when I became a Delta, did I know who I was, but I'm saying I had an opportunity to then see myself in many different mirrors, and to then look at leadership in a different way, and see these women who had similar values, not just friends. Some of them, by the way, aren't even they're not my friends, but they are my sisters. And we do have a shared value system for what we believe in. It's like all of us at VA are colleagues. We don't all like each other, but we know what our mission is. And
Yes.
so it was having that opportunity to really have a different sense of who I was as a Black female, because now I had mirrors all around me to help me then, in the same way I told you about what people could do to figure out how to grow in their leadership. Now I was saying, how do I grow as a Black female in government and
Yeah.
leadership and what? And I had all these models from everywhere that I could see. I love that. So it has helped me in that way. Secondly, that the things that I do believe in, and that I could in diversity, in equity, in inclusion, those things that I truly believe in, I have a way to actually execute my beliefs. There are programs, and there are projects, and there are things that I can do with other people who believe like I believe, and not because it's part of a government initiative. It's because it's part of an organization that's what they do, or social action is the core, and where I get to operate in those things I believe in all the time. And I think the last thing is that I watch that sisterhood sort of show up in ways that I had no idea they would. I had not been a member very long before my father passed away, and my new sisters, they were there in ways that it really just blew me away in how they showed up, and they came to provide food. They were at the funeral home and being, greeters and doing all these things. And I was like, I don't even know these women. But when something
Yeah.
happened, and one of these sisters is like, we need you to do, and it wasn't even me that asked, it was another sister that wasn't in the sorority that called my line sisters and said, your sister needs you to do this, that, and the other. So she coordinated all these things behind the scenes without me even really knowing what was going on. And then they showed up. And I realized that this was something different. This was something
Yeah.
different because I didn't ask them anything, but they showed up and they were there. So, and to understand that that network was, sisterhood really meant something. The word sisterhood really meant something. There was a commitment to that. And it made me sort of more readily willing to show up for other people. Because
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about going off and being a star and singing. That's what I was going to do. And but now it wasn't about me. Now it's about other people. And so I also find myself just being more willing to be of service. It's something I talk about in my job, but now it's not just part of my, the work that I do. Now this is part of my life, and I made a commitment to Delta, and that means making a commitment to my sisters. So in that way, it's made me a better person.
That's awesome. I will say, and again, thank you for inviting me to enjoy the private screening of The Color Purple with your sisters, with the Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated women. I obviously, love the movie, but there was so much power being in that theater with a group of Black women who everybody connected with the empowering message of the movie, and the message of sisterhood from that movie.
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
It was so inspiring to me, Sabrina. I came home and I journaled about it. I even thought I need to be in a sorority. It was so powerful just to be, and you talk about those mirrors. I had that experience at the theater, just having conversation with the sisters, looking at their big earrings with the symbols of their sorority on the earrings, their jackets, all of the, clothing, the colors, everything. It just felt so amazing. And that's just being in a movie theater for a couple of few hours. And so I can't imagine that being a part of my everyday experience. It
Mm-hmm.
was really beautiful. It was just such a beautiful moment. So thank you for
Oh, I'm
inviting me.
so glad that you came. But I'll go back to something you said before about purpose. Oh, one thing we didn't have to know each other to know why we were all there. We came
Yes,
in connected with a bond already, just
yes,
knowing that. So I think then once you saw it and you had all that messaging and we had a shared experience, if we had all been mutes in there and never could have talked, we still would have connected on that day. So I'm glad you were part of it.
a bit. I hear you talk about your dad a lot. Can we talk about your mom and your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, yeah. So, my mother passed away 20 years prior to my father. And so what's interesting, and again thinking about this Women's History Month, is that, I always saw my mother, who probably allowed herself to be in the shadows a lot. That my father was the one who made all the decisions, who sort of took control of the home, took control of the kids, who did everything. And while my mother had her quiet way of asserting power like women do, and and that
Yes.
sometimes that was keeping secrets like women do, and so you don't say everything. And so but what I can mostly say, my mother was a school teacher. She taught special education. um and that's what she retired from doing. But she wasn't, I wouldn't say, like, active in the community as much, because she taught a lot. Students were always around her, in and outside of school, so her community service was like teaching, whether it was in school or out of school. And then her
Yeah.
family, and I think family, she valued that very much. And her sisters lived only about 20-30 miles from our home, so our weekends were spent sort of visiting with the family. Um,
Okay.
and so in addition to that and shopping, that's what my mother did. She was an avid shopper. And I think that the one thing, if my sister were here to tell you about it, it is the one thing that we hated most was going shopping with mom. Because it was all day. It was all day. It's like we were going places and that she could spend hours in one store. So you were just like, I can't believe we're still here. And so, but my mother, she had just a belief in me like no one else. It was one of those things that when she heard Kathleen Battle, who is, a famous operatic soprano, when she heard Kathleen Battle sing and we'd gone to a concert, she said, "Oh, wait, you sing as well as she does." I'm just like, I was like 24 years old or something. Like, what? Are you kidding? This is the Kathleen Battle. She's like, "Oh no, you sing as well as she does." And so it was everything she believed. She believed I could do anything. And she encouraged me to even leave from being in my small town in Ohio. What she said when I went off to college, and I won't ever forget it. And she said, "Don't come back here." And she's like, because this is not a place where you can grow and thrive. She said, don't come back. And I
Wow.
never did. And that's a powerful thing for a parent to tell you when you leave, don't come back.
It
And but I
is.
understood what it meant. It wasn't like I was being pushed out and we don't want you here. It's like for you to
Right.
be your best, you have got to leave here. Um, but Don, if I could, I sit and I think and I'm looking over on my desk, and you will find this well, I hope you'll find it interesting. But to my knowledge, my mother was never a member of Divine Nine organization, any Greek letter organization. But I found my half brothers had given me a trunk that had a lot of materials in it, just stuff. There were some pictures, there were yearbooks from her college, but I found several, and I'm looking at them, several programs from Delta events at
Oh,
Xavier.
wow.
Yeah, it's amazing at Xavier University, but not from 1945. And
Wow.
so I have uh, these materials and a ticket and two programs. So she clearly went to these events. And so I thought that she had some connection, and
Yeah,
she never spoke about it. And we went to college. When I went to college, she never mentioned it. And so, and I say now that perhaps I am the dream deferred. Perhaps she wanted that for
absolutely.
herself. And here I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is beautiful. That's so beautiful. That's so with all that you've done in your life, and none of us know how many people we've touched or the true expanse of our legacy. But based on all you have been intentional about, your living on purpose and being where you belong because you showed up, how would you like to be remembered? And just a little more to think about, not just how you would like to be remembered, um, but what would you like to leave in the world when you're no longer here?
Hmm.
So same question, just asked it a different way.
Yeah. Well, one, this question, it's been it's quite a while ago, but somebody asked me if you could only put 7 words on on your tombstone, what would they
Ah,
be? And I thought about that for a while, and I was trying to bring that back to recollection. But these are the words. I saw my potential in her eyes. I want that to be the legacy, is that when I'm talking to you or anyone else, that when you look at me, that you see me looking at you, that you see me finding ways to, thinking and dreaming with you, and sharing and trying to pour in, but and always asking about what more do you want? So what about that? What are you going to do with that part of your life? Or but always finding when in proximity with me that you're seeing more of yourself, and that you're seeing an expansiveness in yourself. That's what I want to lead, is lives that feel more expansive, more open, more ready, more willing to do bigger and better things, and to always be willing to go beyond average, and to see themselves as being beyond average. That's what I like, is that what I hope that I bring when I'm in someone else's presence, that I just don't, I think for what I want to be my legacy, and what I believe that I will don't have a building or a policy or anything that might say, this is what I'm building, what I'm working towards. I don't have any of that. I tell people that rather than leave a legacy, why don't we just live one? Just live it
yes.
every day, because you don't know, like you just said, today might be the last day. and to say, oh, I wanted to build that building, I wanted to do this or whatever. But you know what? Perhaps you inspired someone else to build the building you didn't get to build. Perhaps
Right.
like
The
my
dream
mother who,
deferred, like your
yeah,
mom.
yeah,
Yes.
just like that. And so, yeah, that's what I want to do. I just want to live my legacy every day in case today is the last one. And that I left a positive word with someone who said, you know what, I talked to that lady. I didn't remember her name, but she told me that I should try this. And now I'm doing that. Yeah, that's my legacy. It shows up in other people. So that's what I'm hoping, that my legacy, rather than being in things, will be in people who will go on to become better people, who will help build better people themselves. And that in that way, the legacy continues on and on and on for as long as time continues.